All right, here we are. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Sorry about that. So we will be continuing, inshallah, Surah Al-An'am, and we were really at وَآتُوا حَقَّهُ يَوْمَ حَصَادِهِ, and we said that there are two major opinions, two or three major opinions, and the first one was because keep in mind that the surah is Mecca, which actually means it was revealed way before zakah was obligated. Zakah wasn't obligated until the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina, and the ayah, of course, the ayah was revealed, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا. So that was not until the Prophet ﷺ moved to Medina that zakah was made obligatory. So then the question is, if this ayah is saying آتوا حقه يوم حصاده and pay its due on the day of its harvest, that is basically the plants, then is this talking about every type of a plant? Is this talking about every single type of plants that we basically would have, whether we're speaking about plants that are to be stored, plants that are not to be stored, edible plants, or plants that we probably use for animals, or plants that we may are perishable? In other words, perishable meaning that they are going to be not stored for long, so they don't last long. So then we said that the Hanafis had considered that every basically plant that we own, that we harvest, is basically going to be required that we pay its zakah. And we said if it reaches 612 to 653 kilograms, then that's when it basically reaches its nisab and zakah is due on it. Yet, for the Malikis, they actually added a new condition, and they considered, well, no, not every single plant is going to be zakat eligible, but in order for it to be zakat eligible, we need to consider that it must be something that is capable of getting stored. Then they had these differences of opinions even within the Malikis themselves. How do we classify these plants that are stored, which plants are to be stored, and of course a lot of their culture, a lot of depending on the region and what they do with these plants and how they actually consider these plants and what classification had a big influence on the madhab and the development of that madhab within the Maliki madhab and how they consider the fatwa in that regards. And of course, when we talk about Shafi'is and Hanbalis, they pretty much agreed with him or agreed with the Malikis to a certain extent. And then they went in, so, how do we, is it supposed to be weighable? How do we weigh it? Or are we going to consider the zakah on it before it is squeezed, just like olives? Are we going to consider before squeezing it? Or are we going to consider after squeezing it? And are we going to consider which items are zakat eligible? And then they'll go into these debates on which item are they zakat eligible, if we're talking about olives, if we're talking about pomegranates, peaches, apples, or perhaps things like walnuts, hazelnuts, almonds, all of that. So they went in different details, but you want to keep in mind, we don't have a specific hadith. So this is really important. In general, we don't have a specific hadith that tells me item 1, 2, 3, 4, but we do have one or actually more than one hadith that the Prophet ﷺ had taken the zakah on things like barley, wheat, dates, and raisins or grapes. That's what we know of. Okay. And from that, those items, are they necessarily because they were more of their, let's say, natural resources in Medina, but they still did grow grapes. They did have grapes. They did have certain plants like apples, peaches, etc. They did have them. Okay, maybe they weren't necessarily the main food resource for them. They didn't have that much of water and the abundance of water to basically grow these kind of plants. So it was completely different than a Ta'if, for example. A Ta'if was going to have better produce, I guess, production than probably Medina. And certainly, you're talking about Bilad al-Sham, they have way better than Medina, and that's you're talking about Bilad al-Sham, you're also talking about al-Kufa, you're talking about two different areas that are distant and at the same time coming in with, I guess, new regions with new food resources. So if you were to look at every single region, the main staple that they have on their plate is basically going to be whatever their land produces. So if you were to go to certain countries, the main staple is corn, other countries it's rice, other countries it's wheat. You know, every single country, it depends on what their land produces. And that becomes the most important staple within their, I guess, within their foods. But certainly that will affect fiqh. Because if those people, their main staple is that, are we going to consider that within our, let's call it, data in understanding fiqh? So that's why you had the Malikis, the Shafi'is, and certainly the Hanbalis basically go into this debate. Is this item to be stored? Is this item considered a fruit even? Or is this considered, no, like an entertainment or condominium or you know, all these different things, condiments or, you know, whatever they call it, and, you know, just an additional thing? Or how do we actually understand the classification of this type of food? And certainly, I guess the practices and the methods of storing from one place to another, you could see that some had better experiences than others. And of course, there's no better, I guess, there's no better way to see the influence of region on a person as much as Imam Shafi'i. And we talked about Imam Shafi'i and how he moved from, well, from Medina and then later to Iraq and was influenced by al-Madhab al-Hanafi, and then later moved to Egypt and was influenced by Layth ibn Sa'd. And we said how these influences had actually created for him an old madhab, and then later on it was called a new madhab. So before he had an old madhab and then later a new madhab. And certainly that was the influence of the region, the influence of course, the influence of meeting new scholars that basically had new information that the other scholars did not. So just keeping that one in mind. Now we are at point 7, but here's one thing. I don't really want to stay so much on this. Just want to make sure that we kind of go over it, but get to those points that teach us something. Let's see. يوم حصاده. So we're 23 points, but we did 6 points already. We're at point 7. يوم حصاده. So we are at this word right here. آتوا حقه يوم حصاده. Abu Amr ibn Amir and Asim, they read it as حصاده, so with a ha having a fatha, but other qira'at, they actually read it as حصاده. It's quite interesting, but are they necessarily different? They're not, they're just لغتان مشهورتان. So when we say لغتان مشهورتان, what does that really mean? It just tells us that it's a different accent, and therefore the Quran approved this accent and approved the recitation within that accent. So keeping in mind that the Quran was revealed in different qira'at, and therefore part of these qira'at, the Quran itself basically approved, in other words, other accents. So hisadihi, hasadihi, just like we have certain words, saram, siram, jada, al-jadad, al-jidad, al-qataf, or al-qitaf. At the end, you know, just different accents and how people might say it, and therefore the Quran approves it. Let's see. Then he goes and says, well, scholars had differences of opinions on when that day that this zakah on such produce is basically due. When is it due? Is it due on the day of harvest? Or is it due that, since this ayah is saying yawma hasadihi, there it is, day of harvest. or is it due on the day that it would become ripe? Okay, the question is, why is this even a question? Why are they debating when it's due? Because if you say that it is due when such a thing happens, that would mean that if this person were to die, then we would still have to pay its zakat. It is due. Whether it perishes, doesn't perish, this was something that you had needed to pay in zakah, and therefore now it is due. It is basically a debt on you. Well, that's a big deal. That's a very big deal, because that would mean if I owed this amount of zakah in, of course, whether we're talking about value or whether we're speaking about, the produce itself, this becomes a debt on me. And from the day of what? From the day of harvest, or from the day that it becomes ripe? Or is it from the day that it basically becomes evaluated by, hey, the government has certain people, and they would come in and say, okay, they've got these experts that would look at the plants, the fruits while they're still on the tree. We didn't even collect them yet. We didn't even harvest them yet, but they're there. So then, of course, the specialist would come in and say, okay, looking at tree number 1, 2, 3, 10, whatever, this is the expected, or at least we're speaking about not only expected, but we're talking about the estimated amount of total kilograms that you have of this produce on your trees. Here it is. Therefore, the total amount due is this number of kilograms. Okay, that's al-khars. Okay, so you got experts would come in and do that. Now, here's the thing, is that when you say the time of harvest, it's pretty easy. Nothing about it. If you were to say on the day that it would ripen, well, that would also be problematic for some, because we may need to collect and harvest these plants before they even become ripe, because we don't want them reaching our customers, or the rest, at least not necessarily whatever we're going to pay zakat on, but we are collecting all of this because we're selling it. So we would need to harvest it before it is actually ready, because we want it to ripen on the way and not ripen in our place and then reach our customers when it was completely ripened and ripe and already going bad. So we're wondering, like, right now, what do you do with this? Are you going to consider that, oh, well, we collected it when it wasn't even ripe? Are we going to say? Or what are you going to say? Let's see. So, of course, this second opinion basically said, well, no, you're going to consider when it's ripe, because what you are really collecting is not necessarily just anything that is not edible, but you are carrying something that is basically going to be food, and basically something that people will eat. So then, if it becomes ripe and it becomes ready to be eaten, that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to basically to pay its whatever is due. And that's when you would be considered required to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessings. And that's when you would deduct a small amount, or the amount due, for its zakah. That's the second opinion. The third opinion said no, it doesn't have to be at that. And therefore, this person that would basically come in, specialized by the government, and he would come in and then say, okay, this is the amount due, and therefore you would be required to give that amount. But here's the thing. Some scholars actually said, well, the Prophet ﷺ, when he sent these people to evaluate and give an estimation for the zakat due on these plants before they were even harvested. That's what the Prophet ﷺ even had done with the Jews, that he would send this person who basically is specialized and would give an estimate and say, okay, this is the amount of zakat, or at least, of course, the Jews don't pay zakat, but they would pay jizya. This is the amount due. So in that situation, they said, well, if the Prophet ﷺ was sending the Jews this person that was giving this amount that is to be estimated, well, we could do the same thing as Muslims, regardless of who it was, because the Prophet ﷺ considered it as a fair way of dealing with plants and at least with harvest and etc. So then therefore we could do the same. The Prophet ﷺ had a person that was specialized, and he would make the final estimate on this, and then would basically let us know of that the keeping track of what is due and how much and so forth. Okay, now here's the thing. That thing about hars, or that estimating, that let's say process, and how do we estimate all of that? That's what scholars even had differences of opinions on. So some scholars like Thawri, they said this is absolutely not acceptable. This is not something that we could use because it is all in place of doubt. Even if it's an expert, this is a person that is we're talking about a specific amount on zakat due. So if you're speaking about a specific amount, then how are you going to be using, if there is a nisab on it, then how are you going to be using an estimation on the amount that is available, even if this person is an expert? Not until you really weigh it are you going to be really considering that is something that is factual, realistic, eligible, whatever it is. So you had some scholars actually consider that don't make sense, and that what really must be done is an actual weighing. So you had some scholars not only say it's hated, but they considered it as an innovation. Okay, but the majority of the scholars, they disagreed, and they basically considered, well, it is permissible, just like it's permissible on palm trees and grapes, because we have a hadith. What is that hadith? They said, well, there's a hadith, Attab ibn Usaid, that the Prophet ﷺ had sent him in order to estimate the grapes and basically give that estimation on how much of zakah are we going to be taking once they become raisins. And that's basically a hadith that was narrated by Abu Dawood. But here's the thing. Let's look at it. This hadith, basically, let's see, Abu Dawood said, Sa'id lam yasma' min Attab shay'an. He said, yeah, sure, we've got a narrator, but guess what? The narration is broken in one piece of that narration. And Tirmidhi said, well, this is Hasanun Gharib. So now we've got a debate. Is this hadith authentic or not? I want you to live this one, because even when we speak about ilm al-hadith, there can be differences of opinions between scholars on the authenticity of a hadith, or even whether a hadith is da'if or not, or even a narrator. They can say, hey, Abdurrahman al-Ifriqi is weak, and another person will say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take that. Why not? Because you said he was weak because some people said that they had seen him eat on the streets. That's not going to affect his hadith narration. But other scholars will say, sorry, yes, it will. Why will it? They said because it's khawarim al-muru'ah. It's not an honorable act to do. Eating on the street? Yeah, they used to take khawarim al-muru'ah seriously. Wait, what do you mean khawarim al-muru'ah? Can you write that word down? Because I couldn't really understand what you said. Okay, fair enough. We're going to write that word down. Here we go. Khawarim al-muru'ah. Al-muru'ah. Okay, so explain that word. Khawarim actually means something is defecting something. Al-muru'ah means chivalry, honor, nobility. means all these words. Okay. So what does that look like? So this is talking about certain acts as not befit for a person. Certain acts do not befit a person that is salih, a person that is of good actions, a noble person. There are certain actions that need to be basically away. I'll give you an example. Imagine that you had seen me and you had seen that I had lip piercing, nose piercing, multiple nose piercing, I don't know, eyebrow piercing, and all these different things on my face. Would you consider that this is something acceptable for a sheikha or not? I am very sure that all of you would see it as one, not professional, two, not eligible for a position of sheikha to be appearing in such a way. You might say, well, it's not haram, but that but is khawarim al-muru'ah. I mean, that but part, that how you made that exception and you felt that's what I mean by you recognizing that that's khawarim al-muru'ah. Not that what you had practiced and saying, but this, that, no, what you are doing is recognizing it's your instinct, recognizing that this is not suitable. This is not acceptable for a sheikha to be in such piercings. It doesn't look professional. It doesn't look like something that would match a believing woman, or let alone a person that is teaching Islam, etc. You recognize that this is not necessarily haram per se, but you recognize it's khawarim al-muru'ah. Okay, so that's khawarim al-muru'ah. And unfortunately, Khawarim al-Muru'ah during our times is barely discussed because unfortunately most people lack muru'ah today. So to speak about Khawarim al-Muru'ah, it's going to appear rather judgmental for many, and it's going to be, I guess, a way that you're going to repel people away in just by talking about it, because every single person is going to feel, I fit within lacking muru'ah. I don't feel good. I feel guilty. I feel this. And then they're going to slip away. So you would barely, in fact, I never heard a dad speaking about khawarim and muru'ah. And I can understand why. I can understand why. So speaking about khawarim and muru'ah right there, I'm just giving you an idea how most of those scholars that debated a certain narrator about khawarim and muru'ah, they basically had, I guess you could consider it different definitions, different grounds. And is this khawarim al-muru'ah? Is this not? And of course, culture plays a very important role in this. So I just wanted to let you know how even in hadith, scholars may have differences of opinions on whether we would consider that act as khawarim al-muru'ah or not. Okay, let's see. Or making that hadith, is it an authentic hadith or not? Okay, let's see. Other scholars, Dawood ibn Ali. Dawood ibn Ali, who's that? Well, that's basically the founder of the Zahiri madhab. What did he say? We said, well, it's quite ironic, even though he is Zahiri. What is Zahiri? Let me give you an idea about his madhab. His madhab considered that you're supposed to be taking the words in the Quran and Sunnah the way that they basically are saying things. You are not supposed to do any analogy, any deep, deriving of the words, or any deep analysis in any way, because you're just going to be taking ظاهر القول to, just a surface interpretation. Don't go deep inside, etc. But here's the thing. Was he always really taking by ظاهر القول? The answer is no. Ibn Hazm is basically following Dawood ibn Ali. Okay, but let's see what he said. الخرص للزكاة جائز في النخل وغير جائز في العنب ودفع حديث عتاب بن أسيد. لأنه منقطع ولا يتصل من طريق صحيح. Stop right there. What does that mean? Okay. Dawood ibn Ali, although, like we said, he was ظاهري. Well, here's the quote that he said. He said, using the method of this evaluation, estimation, as in order to basically consider the amount of zakat due, he said it is permissible in palm trees, but not permissible in grapes. Why? He said, well, you see the hadith that you talked to me about earlier, Attab ibn Usaid, and how the Prophet ﷺ had sent him? I've got a problem with this hadith, he said. What is the problem? He said, well, the problem is that the chain of narration is not actually authentic. There's no connection between the narrators. And that since we've got a broken connection between the chain of narration, we cannot necessarily accept that as a resource for us to say that that method is acceptable. So just to keep that one in mind and just learn how even when we speak about the scholars like Dawood ibn Ali, for example, many would just think that, oh, he's Zahiri, and therefore would think that al-madhab al-Zahiri is to be rejected like that. Not too fast. Whether you're talking about Dawood ibn Ali or whether you're talking about Ibn Hazm, their books, at least Ibn Hazm's book, especially Al-Muhalla, tells you that this person is one of a kind. This was a genius scholar. He wasn't like any other scholar. He was a great scholar in hadith, a great scholar in fiqh, a great scholar in tafsir, a great scholar in lugha arabiya. He wasn't, you cannot whatsoever, if you look into his books, you cannot just basically just consider that, oh, he's just disregarded, we're not going to take him. Once you say that, I know you lack ilm, because if you don't know Ibn Hazm, then you really don't know the ulama. And if you don't know the ulama, do you really know ilm? If you don't know ulama, you don't know the scholars. You don't know which scholar is a qualified one and how other scholars endorsed the scholar and reviewed his ilm, because the only way for you to get ilm is basically by going over the ulama. That's how you get ilm. You don't get ilm somehow by an inspiration coming from God and from Allah to you. No, you get ilm from the traces that it goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. And you get ilm by the scholars that had the ilm to learn, whether it's al-Arabiya, al-Qira'at, Hadith, the Quran, Tafseer, Fiqh, etc. You learn that by going through ulama. So a person that doesn't know ulama, doesn't know al-madhahib, doesn't know who these great scholars are and their value, do they really know ilm? Absolutely. To know ilm, you really have to know ulama. To know ulama, you really have to learn what their ilm contained and the effort that it required for this ilm to get that far. Okay, how do we do il-khars? So if you say that for those scholars that said il-khars, or this evaluation and estimation method, is acceptable, how do you actually do it? Like, how is it done? Okay, let's say, so you would have this expert, according to the scholars that said al-khars was permissible, or al-khars was an acceptable way, and not necessarily hated, like if Thawri had said. They said, well, what they would do is that they would make an estimation on, let's say, the amount of dates that are on the tray, or basically if this was to become dates. So they would look at it. We still don't have it yet ripe, but then we would basically look at the amount, and then this expert would say, okay, once this becomes ripe, this is how much of dates the estimated value is going to be. But here's one thing. Certainly, we would take in consideration, after we take those dates down or whatever plants that we're going to be taking down, we're going to then weigh them. And then we're going to see whether this estimated amount was accurate or not. Okay. Now, we will take in consideration if, let's say, there was a wrong estimation. So yes, we will say, okay, well, we weighed them. This is the amount that we basically came up with. So this is the amount we're going to deduct in perhaps maybe sale, or amount that we're going to deduct in zakat and so forth, or even in donation. Okay, let's see. How many people are we supposed to be getting in order to make this evaluation? Is one enough, or is more? So some scholars actually said, well, one is enough, just like the Malikis. They said one is enough, and therefore we would basically consider if there's an increase. Well, in that situation, let's say this estimator, let's just call him estimator. Okay, he basically said it was 3,000 kilograms. Let's just assume. Okay, but then when we weighed it, it was actually 3,500 kilograms. Are we going to consider the 3,500 kilograms? Or are we going to consider the 3,000 alone? Okay, so then you had differences of opinions between scholars on that. Okay, so the first opinion basically said, well, that's it. They already have this all set, evaluated, and this person that is coming from the government, he basically just made his evaluation. We're not going to go back and forth. So you're just going to continue with whatever he had evaluated, and that was it. Okay, and same thing, whether it was an extra that was discovered, or whether it was actually less than the amount. So what does that mean? So let's say turned out to be 2,500 kilograms. What am I going to do now? Now I'm going to make up this remainder amount. What am I going to do? Okay. So he basically said, well, that's the amount that is going to be due, and therefore you're going to consider that. And other scholars, they said, no, if it is less, then you're not going to necessarily say that they have to make it up out of their own pocket. Okay, then they'll go into that debate. I don't want to get into so much of it. Okay, let's say, what if they basically had seen that, well, there was an exaggerated amount. So they said it was 3,000, but then, of course, he said, well, it doesn't even come up to that. He just said it doesn't even come up to that amount, and that's too exaggerated. Of course, even if you're not necessarily a licensed one, just your own experience, because you had been doing this for such a long time, you probably qualify for a person like that. And you're like, no, I've been farming for this amount of years, and I know that it doesn't actually come up to that estimation that you had claimed. And I'd like to appeal that. Can we actually do that? Certainly, the person can appeal and actually say it doesn't actually come out to that amount, and here's how we would basically debate on that. Okay, let's see. Where does this whole thing actually come from? So the Prophet ﷺ, let's see this hadith. ذكره عبد الرزاق. Let me just talk about Abd al-Razzaq for a bit. Abd al-Razzaq ibn Abi Shaybah. Those are two very important resources. Maybe I could show it to you. Okay, they're called Musannaf. I want you right there. We're going to call it Musannaf Abd al-Razzaq. Here we go. Okay, Musannaf Abd al-Razzaq, and I want you to see it because it's a huge one. Okay. Will they show me? It's actually almost in 20 volumes. Okay, here we go. Is this it? No, it's not. It's almost in 20 volumes. Okay, and this Musannaf, what it would be doing is that it would, one, sometimes collect a hadith, and it's actually in almost 25 volumes. It's a huge one, very big one. Okay, And same thing with Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba. Those are the most two important Musannafat, Ibn Abi Shayba and Abdul Razak. And both of them are almost 23, 25 volumes, depending if you're going to consider the last two volumes, because that's a glossary, but at the end, okay, it's almost in 25 volumes, okay? And these Musannafat, they contain two things. They contain, some are hadith and some are athar. Athar is? Athar is a narration that is upon the Sahabi. So an athar is a narration that a Sahabi would do, like one of the Prophet's companions. Okay. So why do we even take the Prophet's companions' narrations anyways? Because remember, the Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahaba, and the Sahaba were basically the collective resource that traces all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. They were basically this ilm, this walking knowledge that basically would let us know what did the Prophet ﷺ, what were they witnessing that the Prophet ﷺ was saying or doing. So we needed these Sahaba to let us know this information. They were basically the ones to give us this ilm. Then, of course, the scholars had differences of opinions on whether we are talking about, there's something called marfu' and mawquf. Stop right there for a second. What's the difference? Now, there's a difference. If I were to have, I'm going to write it down. There's marfu' and there's mawquf. Okay. Now, there's a difference, not because a Sahabi had taken it, or right away going to say, okay, that's coming from the Prophet ﷺ. Not too fast. Because we're going to evaluate and we're going to scrutinize their words. If those words are words that a person cannot basically know on his own, or this couldn't be a personal opinion of his, then that would be marfu'. Like what? Like, let's say a Sahabi is telling me about Jannah, or a Sahabi is telling me about the prophets and information about the prophets and what happened during the prophet, during other prophets. We're not talking about during the Prophet's time, okay? But he's telling me of things that are considered ghaib, that are considered information that is part of the unseen. So there's no way that he got that as an inspiration from other than the Prophet ﷺ, that he told him this information. That would be marfu'. Okay. Mawquf, on the other hand, is different, because al-mawquf would be that's his own personal estimation, his own personal explanation, his own personal take on this. That's mawquf. That's his own opinion. Now, in the mawquf piece of it, that's where they had differences of opinions. Are there words to be taken as a resource of legislation or not? Like what? Like, let's say Umar ibn al-Khattab says that you are not going to do such and such, or this is what you need to be doing, or Abdullah ibn Umar saying something. Am I going to take their words and consider it as, well, since Umar ibn Khattab said it, then that would make it haram or halal? Am I going to do that? Differences of opinions between scholars. Is this an evidence that I could use in order for me to say that here's my resource and here's my evidence, to use that as a legislation resource in order for me to say, well, yes, I have Umar al-Khattab said, or Abdullah ibn Umar said, then therefore here's my evidence. All right. So just to keep that one in mind, and the scholars would debate on that one. And certainly, no scholar would say we're not going to take the Sahabi's take on it, but they will debate on whether we're going to make it as a strong resource to use or not. Okay, let's see. Now, why did we say that? Because, let's see, Ibn Abi Zubayr, that he had heard Jabir ibn Abdullah say. Okay, now here's that area. Marfu' mawquf. He said, Abdullah ibn Rawaha basically had given an estimation on 40,000 wasq. So 40,000 wasq. 5 wasq are 612 or 653. So this is a unit. Okay, this is a weighing unit. So this would make it as, let's say, I would have to basically, just say, okay, hold on. Let me see if I can. I'm going to make this and actually calculate it. Okay. I'm going to ask ChatGPT on what that would actually come up as in terms of amount. I hope it gives me fast. Okay. So he is saying, let's say, I don't know if it's a he or a she, but whatever. So it was 4,896 kilograms. So that's 40,000 wasq. Okay. So 4,800, just a fast estimation, 4,800 kilograms. And he basically had considered that the Jews had chosen, or that the Jews had basically, Ibn Rawaha had told them, would you want to give 20,000, or they gave him 20,000 wasq, okay? And Ibn Jurayj had said, then therefore, the person that is the estimator, if he sees that that was probably exaggerated, then in that situation, they would basically give somewhat like, it's kind of like we're talking about bargaining the amount. So it's like we're bargaining the amount of what does this look like? Then can they actually bargain the amount? So the Jews, of course, they were bargaining the amount because they didn't want to pay. That was considered a tax to them. So they were bargaining the amount. Can they bargain the amount? Can we look at the estimation and all of that? Just to keep that one, just to keep that one as a place of differences of opinions. I'm not going to get into that. Okay. Can this estimation be after it ripens? See, the Prophet ﷺ, Sayyidah Aisha had said that he would send Abdullah ibn Rawaha to the Jews and he would estimate the amount of palm trees when they ripen, at least when, and just before it is edible. And then he would give the option and basically give the choice to the Yahud. Would they want them to take and deduct the amount of tax that is upon them, upon the Yahud? Would they want that tax to be taken before they ripen, or would they want it to basically consider paying it on the day of when it ripens? Okay, let's say, so that would basically mean what? That the Prophet ﷺ was giving them the option. Do you want to pay it when it is estimated right now, or would you want to basically pay it later? But at the end, we're going to consider a certain estimation that Abdullah ibn Rawaha basically would estimate. The Prophet ﷺ basically used that as a method for the Yahud. So then the scholars had differences of opinions on zakah. Can we use it the same way or not? Okay, I'm going to skip all of that for a bit. I'm going to skip some of this. Let's see this hadith at least. If the evaluator or this person, that estimator, all right, and if he had given a certain فَحُكْمُهُ أَنْ يُسْقِطَ مَنْ خَرِصَهُ مِقْدَارًا مَا. Okay, so if we're talking about this evaluator person, that the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا خَرَصْتُمْ فَخُذُوا وَدَعُوا الثُّلُث فَإِنْ لَمْ تَدَعُوا الثُّلُث فَدَعُوا الرُّبُعَ. Okay, so this is what are we talking about here? Are we talking about that al-khars right there, basically leaving a certain amount, or how do we? Okay, I'm gonna skip this part of it because, of course, I think I don't want to, let you all get lost in all of these different things. So we'll just let it in this broad, I guess, knowledge of it, that, in terms of al-khars, or in terms of those evaluators, is it before? And what if, this one's actually important. What if the evaluator came in and then after evaluation, it turned out to be a certain amount of zakat? And before they had managed to pick it, before harvest, and then some kind of a calamity happened. I don't know, locusts, they came in and ate up everything. Everything is gone. So all the scholars had said that there would be no zakat due on this person, even if the evaluator had come in and said, there's the amount of zakat that you have to pay. But then the locust came in, or perhaps extreme cold weathers basically ruined all the plants. Then in that situation, there's no zakat on it, unless there was an amount probably stored already, managed to keep it in some, I don't know, greenhouse or whatever, and some of it was more than khamsat awsaq. So we're talking about 612 to 653 that was already there, probably kept and stored somewhere. Then you would have to pay zakat on that, since it was stored, and whatever calamity happened on the rest did not affect whatever that you had stored, which is zakat eligible. Okay, let's see. Is there zakat if it's less? So I'm basically growing apples, pears, and whatever in my backyard, and do I have to pay zakat on that? If it's less than 612 to 653 kilograms, no, there's no zakat on it. So how do we know? How do we know that there's no zakat? Well, atu haqqahu yawma hasadihi, and certainly the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, ليس فيما دون خمسة أوسق من تمر أو حب صدقة. There's the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ basically said, well, there's no zakah if it's less than خمسة أوسق, which is that unit that we talked about. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا أنفقوا من طيبات ما كسبتم ومما أخرجنا لكم. So that's basically to let us know that there is a nisab. What is a nisab? A nisab is basically this amount that we would consider as the maximum amount that it would later, beyond that number, it would basically be zakat eligible. Okay, so that's what would make it as zakat eligible if it reaches a nisab. Okay, so let's move on right there. And whoever has basically dates or raisins, that would all be together. Okay, so let's say I have this amount of dates in this amount of raisins. Do I put them together to make 612? What if they both added together 612 to 653 kilograms / khamsat awsaq, or 5 awsaq? Do we actually consider that, yeah, well, when I combine them together, they would add up to make this amount of number? Does that make it zakat eligible? The answer is no. We're speaking about if you were to have 612 or 653, let's say up to that, of raisins, or of that of dates. That's when you would consider it. Not that you would add them up all together and say, okay, well, all together, this is how much they would weigh. And that's the same thing if you were to have barley, if you were to have wheat. You don't add these things together and say, well, together they would make this amount. Okay, and they had differences of opinions. If you were to add barley and also wheat together, so you had some scholars, actually like al-Maliki madhab, they said, well, only these types of these three types of, what are these types? Okay, so this one is basically a sult, so that's basically a kind of, it's like flour. oh, what are they? So it's a kind of like a, they said it's white flour that basically is removed from the grain, the qishra. Al-qishra is basically the outside part. So this is talking about like flour, what they make white flour from, and al-burr would be the wheat itself. This one is really this, but without without the peel of it. You know, when they make that, when they make white flour, they just basically take out the wheat of it, and that's why it becomes so white. Okay, all right. Regardless, so can we actually combine these three items together and say, well, this is how much what they would weigh all three together? So that's again differences of opinions between scholars. I'm going to skip all of this. All right, I'm going to skip all of this. And so you got Shafi'i said you'll combine them because each one basically is of a different value and each one is a completely different substance. So therefore, to combine them, you're basically combining variant things together. And they are of different items. Just like you would have a different value for, let's say, barley, a different value for wheat, and certainly you would not put them together. Same thing if you were to basically put in the different types of, that's a tricky one. What if we're talking about different kinds of dates? So we've got sukari dates, we've got tamir, we've got ajwa. Are we going to combine those kind of dates? We've got different kinds of dates. Are we going to put that together and say, okay, here are all these kind of dates? Even though sukari dates is definitely a completely different price than perhaps the other ajwa dates. This is one price and that's one price. And why are they different prices? Well, they're different prices because of the amount they need in handling, the amount of, let's say, also request, how much people would need these, and certainly care and handling and all of that. There are a number of different things, and how long it takes to basically grow as well. All of that does affect the value and the price of all of this. Can we actually add these together? So you had also some scholars actually say that yes, you can add those types of different, whether we're speaking about dates together and basically put them together, whether they were, let's say, of a good quality, let's say quality A and quality B and quality C, and you're going to be putting them all together. Or you're going to say, well, of quality A, which is the most expensive, this is the amount of weight I have. Quality B, this is the amount of this is the amount of this. Same thing if we're talking about raisins. You got black raisins, you got red raisins, you got basically the yellow raisins, and each one has a price. And certainly the raisins, some of them are, quality A, quality B, and of course, are we going to be adding these together and say, okay, quality A, I've got this amount, that amount, or how do we consider this classification? So at the end, just keeping that in mind, differences of opinions between scholars. I'll just leave it at that. Don't want to go into much details. You got Layth, who's a Layth ibn Sa'd. He basically said you would just add all of those together, and then you're just going to pay the zakat on it, and that's it. No need to say of quality A, of quality B. So that makes things easier. And that's the same thing. He said, just like if you were, look at this one. كان أحمد بن حنبل يجبن عن ضم الذهب إلى الورق وضم الحبوب بعضها إلى بعض، ثم كان في آخر أمره يقول فيها بقول الشافعي. Why would you say يجبن? Let's look at it. Okay, so here I want to look at this one. Let me first translate what this says. This is basically saying that Imam, hold on, let's look at it. I want you to look at it right there. He said, Ahmad ibn Hanbal used to be yajbun. What is yajbun? Jubun actually means to be a coward. In other words, he was fearful of something. What was he fearful of? He was fearful of making a fatwa in that regards. Ahmad ibn Hanbal was a person that was more a muhaddith than a faqih. All right, more a muhaddith than a faqih. And Ahmad ibn Hanbal was very considerate over every single word that he uses in fatwa. And that's why he said yajbun. He was fearful of using a word to make a final fatwa and be held accountable for it. So that's why he used just yajbun. But in the footnote, he said, fil istidhkari yanha. What is al-istidhkar? Al-istidhkar is basically a book for Ibn Abd al-Barr. And he said, well, the word is actually yanha and not yajbun. So he basically said, well, yeah, and same thing with it, tamheed, that it was not the word yajbun, but the accurate word that he had used is yanha, that he used to forbid combining gold to silver or combining the different types of grains together in order to say, well, this is the amount of zakah that is due. And at the end of his life, they said that he was saying basically the same thing that Shafi'i was saying. In other words, he was saying that, yes, you can combine all these weights together and just give the zakah and basically the due zakah on the combined total weight of all of that. It's quite interesting. But at least just see this one, you know. Okay, let's see. No, 18. Let's say we're going really fast right there. And I promise to do that. What if somebody, the person that owns this, they had used some of it up before it was even ready to harvest? Then what are we going to do? So opinion number one, they said, well, we would then consider that as due upon them because and therefore we would consider what? We would consider that they would have to basically consider the amount that they had taken. So you consumed, let's say, 100 kilos. You had given some to your brothers, some to your sisters, some to this and this person, etc. Yes, I want you to weigh all of that and say, oh, this is how much I weighed. This is the amount that I had consumed as, let's call it personal consumption. And I gave it to this and I've used it for myself, etc. Then you are going to consider, according to that opinion, that you're going to consider that amount, and you're going to tell this person that came to estimate the amount of zakah that is due upon you. You're going to say, oh, please consider that I had deducted 100 kilos for personal consumption or for personal use or for my personal distribution. Okay, so just keep that one in mind. The other scholars, they basically said, no, we disagree with you on that. And zakah is only to be considered after they had basically, considered all of it and had, harvested everything. And now they're starting to, see the total amount that was harvested and then the total amount that we're going to be considering for zakah and etc. So basically at the final stage, not early in its beginning. So this man was like, you know what, we still didn't get it finally harvested, but I'm just gonna, his sister came over and said, hey, my brother, I know I really liked your dates and I really like that. Can you just give me some and I'll let them ripen at home? And he said, yeah, you know what, sure. Am I going to say, you know what, before me giving my sister some of those dates, I'm going to first weigh it. Sorry, sister, but I'm going to need to weigh it first. Or is he going to say, yeah, you know what, we're standing here. You know what, Abdullah, go, my dear son, get me a bag. We're going to put your auntie some of those dates right there. So he goes and basically cuts it up and gives her like a whole one right there. No need to, get into weighing it and all of that. Is this an opinion? It's a considered opinion. Okay, just to mention that piece of it, even before going into all those details. Let's say, I'm just going to skip all of that. It's really a lot for you. Okay, what about things like fava beans? It's quite interesting how they wrote hummus or I don't know, hummus, because we call it hummus. Al-julban أخضر. And al-julban, they're basically green peas. We call it bazilla in my country, Palestine. In Tunisia, Morocco, they call it julban. So I wonder, it's quite interesting. Remember yesterday, they when we talked about al-fakiha, and we said in North Africa, they say al-fakiha for things like almonds, for things hazelnut, basically for different kinds of nuts. They call them fakiha, and they call fruits ghalla. And in my culture, ghalla is treasure, not fruits. I remember when I first got married, my husband told me, "Can you get me the ghalla?" And I gave him the look like, "You want me to bring you the ghalla?" He said, "Give me the ghalla." My husband is Tunisian. And I said, in my culture, ghalla means treasure. You know, the treasure that, Ali Baba goes and somehow finds, in a jug hidden in some kind of a cave. That's al ghalla. Okay. The second he told me, "Get me the ghalla," and I was like, "You know what? You didn't even give me a ghalla in mahar for me to give you a ghalla. I'd be happy to give you a ghalla, but I definitely don't have that." And he said, "It's right there. Get it to me." And I basically didn't know what he was talking about. And he said, "It's right there." I said, "Can you come and show me where the ghalla is? Because to be honest, I don't even see it." So he goes to the table and takes all the fruits and he says, "This is ghalla." Oh man, that second, I was like, "This is your ghalla." Okay. So yeah. And that's one thing. Of course, fakiha. And another time he said, "Give me the fakiha," and I got him the ghalla. Okay. Because fakiha to us is basically the fruits, but to them, the fakiha is basically the nuts and not the fruits. So, that differences of cultures and how you name things. And that's one thing, is that, of course, the word julban, okay, to them is the green peas. And you could see that Qurtubi was using that and not bazilla. So, julban, I would assume all the Levant. I don't know if in places in Syria and Lebanon, whether they would use julban or not. But julban is green peas. Okay, so are we going to consider that their zakah after they had been dried, or are we going to consider the weight before they had been dried? When do we consider that? Same thing if we're talking about fava beans, we're talking about chickpeas. Are you going to say when it is dried or when it is not dried? All right. And some scholars, they debated that. One, do we consider before dryness or after? Or do we consider, in fact, just the value of their cost? That's quite interesting. Just the value of their cost. Let's go move on. I just wanted to say differences of opinions. Don't want to go in details with that one. All right. Let's say someone is saying something in nuts. Okay. Oh, you just call them nuts? Well, I mean, are we talking about like in Syria they call them nuts, and Lebanon they call them nuts? Okay. Well, we call the nuts. What do we? Hummus. I think that's what we call nuts. Am I right? Mahmus. Hummus. I don't know. I don't know. Is that what we call them? Okay, well, I don't know. I even forgot my own accent right now, and I forgot my own culture. Okay, what about the things that don't necessarily become become dried? Just like when we're talking about tamir, it lasts very long, and you can just leave it to store, and it will actually last pretty long, and you don't necessarily have to store it in a certain way. Of course, you don't want to put it in an area that is very dry or very, I guess, very hot, because then it will ripen even faster and mold and go, bad. And same thing, but of course you could still, you just put them out there and they can store in a good area, and you don't even have to, consider something, a special way of storing for them. So what if things, you could only use them if you squeeze them? I can't think of something, to be honest. You could only use it if you squeeze it. Oranges, no. I mean, okay, let's say Malik said you would deduct the amount of zakah from its price. Are we talking about things like oranges? I mean, we don't necessarily just eat oranges or squeezed, but you can also eat them like that. Tell me something that you could only eat it, or you can only consume it. Let's use that word. If it is squeezed, tell me in the chat. I can't think of anything right now. Okay. All right, let's see. So as for the stuff that only is consumed after it is squeezed, then in that situation, we're not going to weigh the juice itself, but we're just going to consider the value. So if, let's say, the value is coming up to more than $4,122 approximately, okay, then in that situation, we're going to say, okay, the amount of zakat due on it is 2.5%. Okay. So in other words, we're not going to say, okay, this amount of juice is, how much is it in kilograms? No, we're going to look at the value of it. And other scholars, they said, no, we don't necessarily look at the value, but we would look at taking the amount when it reaches khamsat awsat, reaches this amount, 612 to 653 kilograms and above. Then in that situation, we're going to consider that 10th of it, in other words, 10% of it goes in zakat. If it was irrigated naturally, and 5% if it was irrigated with our own irrigation. 21 point, we're almost done. Ibn Umar, or Abu Dawood, narrated that Umar ibn al-Khattab, so this is the son of Umar ibn al-Khattab, that the Prophet ﷺ had said, فيما سقط السماء والأنهار والعيون أو كان بعلا العشر وفيما سقي بالسواني أو النضح نصف العشر. Hold on. So the hadith basically says, whatever was irrigated by, let's say, irrigated by using what? فيما سقط السماء, by the sky. So we're talking about natural irrigation, whether we're speaking about skies, meaning rain or springs, or basically natural, let's call it natural resources, didn't require much. So they basically had spring water or probably maybe lake water, and they managed to get with that water, okay, that would be 10% due in zakat. وفيما سقي بالسواني. What is سقي بالسواني? So here's the one. When you look at بالسواني, you're going to go one, and you're going to see he said بالسواقي. What do you mean بالسواقي? And he said that is basically in kha and mim. What is kha and mim? Okay. When the author wants to take this book, this al-Qurtubi book, to get published, before they would do that, they would have to get as many manuscripts and start comparing the manuscripts. So they would get a manuscript which they would label as meme, which probably comes from maybe Germany, Frankfurt in Germany, because of course we know the story we told you about the different manuscripts that they were stolen by the colonizers and basically taken to whether in London or Frankfurt or Holland or etc. And the manuscripts are still there. but right now we can have access to these manuscripts. You can contact them and they can send you a microfilm, or you can, if you were to probably have the license, they might actually give you access to that in printing. They might print it for you, or you might actually get access to the actual manuscript if you qualify. Okay, now you can get access to that. So let's say I got a microfilm for Tafseer al-Qurtubi, which was preserved in Frankfurt. And I got another manuscript for Tafseer al-Qurtubi that was preserved in the library in London, and another one preserved in, I don't know, in a library in Turkey. Okay, then I'm going to label, let's say, the one in Frankfurt as probably fa, and the one in London may be lam, and the one in Turkey may be ta. Okay, and that way I would say, but here's one thing, because they were scribing those books by hand, certainly there were going to be typos, or sometimes the ink is not basically clear, probably blended, or probably the person that scribed it maybe miswrote something. So you could say that he is telling you that in manuscript dal zada, and what is dal zada? We would have to go back to the first volume of this book and basically see, okay, where did you get the manuscript da, and which one did you classify as manuscript da? So we would have to go back to his introduction and say, well, this is what I labeled there, this is where I got it from, and this is what the manuscript looks like. Okay, so this is just to let you know. So in the other manuscripts, they didn't say bisawani, but they said bisawaqi. Okay, not bisawani, but bisawaqi. So this noon, you could see that when you are scribing, think of the methods that they were using to write. So the ink sometimes can appear blended, that you're not really sure if this is a noon or whether this is a qaf. So then you would just write it, just write it as is. So you could see other manuscripts per se, but sawaqi. Regardless, we know that it was talking about, let's say, artificial or synthetic methods of irrigation. Okay, synthetic, different methods of irrigation. In other words, we're basically irrigating those crops using manufactured methods to irrigate. All right, so in that situation, that would be 5%. That would be 5%, and that's how we would basically look at it. So the method and the type of watering, this goes for the plant. Okay, let's see. And certainly let's look at this hadith. Is this hadith even, let's say, this hadith, it was narrated in Bukhari, you can't beat that, and and Abi Dawood. Okay, so yes, this hadith is authentic. Okay, قاله ابن السكيت. And I really wanted to talk about Ibn Sikit, but okay. I'm gonna write there, try to skip that one because and he said, what did he say? يزكى كل واحد منهما بحسابه أن يشرب شهرين بالنطح. What if we're using both methods? Certainly we got a good amount of rain, but the amount of rain was not enough this year. So we had to back up and use a backup for the amount of rain, for the amount of water that was necessary to grow these crops. The first opinion, they basically said you're going to consider the majority of that irrigation and what was it, where was it coming from? The second opinion, they said, well, you're going to use an estimation. Was it natural irrigation by, let's say, 10% of its irrigation is this much, or 20% of its irrigation, or, approximately, we're not saying exact. Okay, so then we're going to, the other opinion, they said, well, we're going to use the estimation, and it would be 10% of what you had considered with your taqwa as, yes, 10% of it was irrigated by natural irrigation. So they're going to say, okay, 10 of that 10% is going to be basically given in zakah by 10%. And since you said 70% of it or 80% of it, okay, or well, actually 90% of it was, let's say, irrigated by artificial resources, or basically the artificial type or manufactured or whatever new irrigation method that you had used, then you're going to say, okay, out of the 90% or out of the, let's say, this amount percent of it is going to be 5% due of it on zakah. Okay. And that's basically to, just consider that one. So same thing. Well, you got Abu Hanifa and Abu Yusuf and Muhammad. That's one. And I want you to see between the brackets right there. He basically said we would look at the majority of it. We would look at the majority of it and therefore consider the majority and not necessarily look at the other things. So for Abu Hanifa and Abu Yusuf, they regarded that, no, we're going to consider the majority of this and not necessarily start saying this much and this percentage of this. No, we're just going to look at it. I want you to look at al-Tahawi. He said, majority اتفق الجميع على أنه لو سقاه بماء المطر يوما أو يومين أنه لا اعتبار به ولا يجعل لذلك حصة فدل على أن الاعتبار بالأغلب. He said all the scholars, they would agree, if let's say it rains a day or two or some more days, that we're not going to consider. And therefore, we would just consider the majority of it. Let's look at this one. قلت, that is القرطبي, فهذه جملة من أحكام هذه الآية ولعل غيرنا يأتي بأكثر منها على ما يفتح الله له. Look at this one. Look at the adab right there. Al-Qurtubi said, and this is a part of the rulings in regards to this ayah, and perhaps others may come with other issues that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had inspired them with. Just keeping that one in mind. Why? Because of the adab. That, at the end is that Al-Qurtubi is letting you know that I didn't discuss each and every single thing. This is just a part of what I wanted to discuss in regards to this ayah. This is a summary. We did it in 3 classes, but certainly we can expand it to more. But I just wanted to, I guess, just not make you all bored. So I'll just summarize it. Okay, let's see, point number 22. But I guess, just see that one. جملة من أحكام ولعل غيرنا يأتي بأكثر منها, and maybe others can actually get more than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically inspired us with. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give him على ما يفتح الله له, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would inspire them even with more than what we were inspired with. Point number 22. As for ليس في حب ولا تمر صدقة, of course the hadith that فيما دون 5 أوسق, what is less than 5 أوسق, basically that unit, we see that this is وهذه قال وهذه السنة. Okay, السنة لم يرويها أحد عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من أصحابه غير أبي سعيد الخدري. It was narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, basically. Abu Umar had said, وهذه سنة جليلة تلقاها الجميع بالقبول. Alhamdulillah. Sorry, that pause was for the sneeze. Alhamdulillah. Everybody. I'm sure you said it. Okay. I want you to look at this hadith. This hadith we did say before. I believe I just mentioned it earlier. Where was it? It's the hadith that we said it was narrated by al-Bukhari. Okay. Where was it? فيما سقط السماء. Oh, okay. No, where was it? Where was it? We just mentioned it, right? Just a second ago. Okay, anyhow, so basically this hadith, I want you to look at it, that in hab or tamr, that there, if something is less than 5 awsaq, that there would be no zakat on it. Okay, who was it narrated by? It was narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. Okay, but here's the thing. Do we have other narrators? This is extremely important. Okay, many times people would come out and say, well, we only have one hadith. And I remember seeing one time on Instagram, a woman, hijabi, she said, hey, this can't be a hadith that we can accept because it was only narrated by Sayyidah Aisha or only narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri or anything like that. Do we necessarily have to get 20 and 30 narrators in order for us to say that this is acceptable or not? The answer is no. One hadith by one Sahabi, if it is authentic, we're going to take it. It doesn't have to be a number of different scholars. In fact, the hadith that were considered mutawatir are very few, very limited. Mutawatir means what? Meaning that we have a huge number of different Sahaba and another huge of different number of Tabi'een, then another huge of narrators basically narrated that. Those are very few ahadith, by the way. We don't have a lot of ahadith mutawatira. So a lot of those ahadith are actually just one narrator. That's enough for a Muslim to say, that's it, sami'na wa ata'na. And Abu Umar, I want you to look at this one. Abu Umar, basically Ibn Abd al-Barr, he said, وهذه سنة جليلة تلقاها الجميع بالقبول ولم يرويها أحد عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من وجه ثابت محفوظ غير أبي سعيد. He said, this is a sunnah that everyone had taken as accepted, and even though no one had narrated this hadith as from authentic narrations, that is, except one narration that is authentic. All the other narrations, they're not necessarily authentic, but we have one authentic narration upon Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, and therefore everyone else was going to take it as the reference. Okay, and Drawa Jabir, basically similar narrations. We've got similar hadith that narrated the same thing, but the narration itself, there was a problem with it. So it does support what was narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, but they basically had said, well, yes, certainly, this is perhaps that chain of narration for that particular hadith is not authentic, but we have one hadith that is basically authentic, and then therefore we're going to take it. Okay, so let's see. So who is Hamzatul Kinani? What is al-Kinani? Al-Kinani basically is a way to tell you that this person is Egyptian. Okay, that he is Egyptian. And let's see, he said, جمع وصنف وكان متقنا توفي سنة. Okay, so he died at 357 year Hijriya. He was Egyptian. He was a scholar. So when you look at that, Mujawwid is basically a scholar of Quran. And he basically had written a number of different books. So at least we see, why did they even say that? Because he said, no one said this hadith except Thiqa Qurashi or Ismail ibn Umayyah, and he was Thiqa and he was Qurashi and he was the son of Sa'id ibn al-As. So that was his objection. And then they said, well, here's the response to this. But at the end is that even if we only have one narration, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to turn it down. Okay, the ayah, وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. What is al-israf? So let's continue. How did we get وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا? So it's basically the end of the ayah. وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is لَا تُسْرِفُوا? So لَا تُسْرِفُوا means do not. Well, the word israf has a number of different meanings in Lugha Arabiya. It can mean to wander certain money, and it could also mean to use something in other than what it was supposed to be directed in. In other words, put something in where it doesn't belong. That's an israf. So, in other words, if something is exceeding the limit of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered as where it should be in, that's israf. So, does that mean we're speaking about, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُؤْتُوا السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَكُم. Don't give as-sufaha, don't give those that are sufaha, those that don't have the discipline. Even if it is their own money, don't give them that money. Why? Because they're wandering it, and you have to make sure that you as a guardian ad litem, you as a guardian for that person, that you are going to be making sure that this safih, a safih can be a child, and a safih can be a person that is mentally disabled, or a safih can be even a grown man that has issues with their akhlaq, at least in that area. With their akhlaq, they're probably just not considering a sensible male distribution, and they'll probably maybe, money management issues. They'll probably spend, on probably name brand things and end up struggling with paying their own bills, probably for the electricity or probably for gas or anything like that. But they were really just spending so much money on probably buying brand shoes, name brand shoes and name brand purses or whatever, and basically end up struggling. So that's a person that is safi. Safi can be very similar to al-musrif. Al-musrif or al-israf is putting things in where they do not belong, in general, where they do not belong. So if this person, al-israf, if they are having these resources, but they lack money management, then this person is musrif. But here's a question. Let's say I'm a rich woman and I can afford to, I don't know, go to traveling or probably even buy the fruits and vegetables maybe from expensive places. There are other places that sell it for cheaper. It's a cheaper quality, but it's cheaper. At least it's cheaper. Is that considered israf? What can be considered israf to you, and depending on your situation, may not be israf for someone else. What's going to determine? What's going to determine is there are three different things. Number one, you've got al-darurat, you've got al-tahsinat, and you've got al-hajiyat. Okay? Al-darurat are basically necessities. Are you covering with your money the main needy things, the main necessities that you basically need to cover? Yes, I am. Okay, great. Good for you. Then, if you are covering the main things that you need to cover, and you still had enough money to go for hajiyat. What are hajiyat? So hajiyat, extra things that can, let's say, make a better quality of life, and I had the money, then in that situation, sure, you can go an extra. And yeah, I also had money to go for tahsinat. Tahsinat, it's not necessary, but yeah, I can, I'd like to have beautiful flowers and beautiful things around my house. And yeah, drapery, I'd like to go for upgrading the drapery and like to upgrade for something rather fancier, etc. So there we go, here goes tahsinat. And yeah, not only the drapery, but I also wanted to perhaps, even the silverware, the kitchen things, and wanted to get something rather more expensive and something that looked fancier, etc. That's basically tahsinat. Okay, but here's one thing. If a person was not covering their darurat, their necessities, and they're struggling with the main things that probably covering, let's say, the necessity. So what are they doing? Well, you've got the electricity bill to cover, you've got water, food, Islamic schools to pay for your children. This is all necessity. And then this person decided that, I know the women are going to like this one. He's struggling to pay basically for the kids' Islamic schools, and he ended up saying, I don't have enough money, and put them in public schools and got them basically susceptible to fitna, and then said, oh, I need to get married to a second wife. Oh, really? You need to get married to a second wife? And your kids are basically right there, not in Islamic school? That's safa. I know ladies are going to like that. That's israf, and that's safa. Certainly, yeah, you can get married to a second wife. It's not haram per se, but it's misusing your money management. It's okay. Certainly, this is ما طاب لكم من النساء. فانكحوا ما طاب لكم من النساء. This is going to be as ما طاب لكم من النساء. This is going to be an extra thing. Okay. But if you are struggling with necessity, you can't go for something else, just like getting probably fancier drapery, or probably maybe a second wife, and then end up basically putting those children in public schools and putting them in fitna. That's going to be safa. That's going to be israf. Israf, and yeah, of course, israf. Same thing. If you are having a maldistribution in covering and understanding necessity, and understanding let's say, the needs and the wants, and you're confusing this maldistribution, how much money is put in this, how much money is put into that, and you're confusing those, then that's the definition of israf. If you're confusing, you're struggling with necessity, and you find yourself basically getting into paying money for those name brands and all those extra things, and you're paying more money in the wants than in the needs, then that's israf and safa. That's lack of money management. Okay? And that's israf, and that's safa. But if you had the money, yeah, I'm a rich woman, all my kids, Islamic schools, everything our needs are basically covered, and I got even a plus to basically buy fancy couches, fancy drapery, all of that, and hey, I got enough money to cover all of that. Well, good for you. Is that necessarily israf? No, it depends on your financial situation. If you're capable of covering that, and you're capable of doing that, and it's not affecting the needs and the wants, the hajiyat and tahsiniyat and darurat, etc., well, yeah, you could. That's not israf for you. But it would be israf if you weren't capable of covering it. You're going and buying Gucci bags and buying fancy drapery and buying fancy cars when your kids are not even put in Islamic schools. Then that's a very big problem. That's a lack of money management. So now here's one thing. So what's the difference between israf, and is it only, or when we're talking about israf, is it going to be just in money? No, because any type of energy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called Lut as musrifin. Why would he call them musrifin? I mean, they were engaging in non-sexual act. But why is that called musrifin? Any type of potential that in any type of resource, if you don't put it where it belongs, it's going to be a form of israf. Okay? So whether that meant calories, or whether that meant money, or whether that meant intelligence, or whether that meant physical focus, or physical power, or whether that meant mental focus, or whether that meant your time, How much time are you spending on learning? How much time are you spending on cooking? How much time are you spending on teaching your children? How much time are you spending on shopping, etc.? If you're using your time, or you're using your potentials, or you're using if you're making a maldistribution, then that's israf. You're wasting so much time on probably watching maybe movies or whatever it is, or probably talking to your friends, or probably shopping. And that's going to be at the expense of probably seeking ilm, or the expense of probably cleaning your house, or at the expense of make quality time with your children, or teaching your children. Then that's israf. That's al-israf. Al-israf is in anything. Same thing, just like we said, Qawm Lut. They were basically putting the potential that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them to reproduce. They were putting it in the wrong area. That's israf. So israf is more comprehensive than wandering money. It's any type of potential, time, money, resources, intelligence, whatever potentials you would have, then putting it in where it belongs, in the fair distribution. That's al-adl. That's al-adl. Israf is misusing it, wandering it. It's confusing where it belongs. So this is basically it. I found this really good article. Let me see right there. Let me share it with you. And I was actually wanting to share it with you right there. And it was supposed to be al-israf wa darar fi ad-din wa ad-dunya. It was really good. And I really like this quote right there. Where was it? Hold on. This one. He said, واعلم أن الصرف والتبذير قد يفترق معناهما، فالصرف هو الجهل بمقادير الحقوق، والتبذير هو الجهل بمواقع الحقوق، وكلاهما مذموم، وذم التبذير أعظم، لأن المسرف يخطئ في الزيادة والمبذر يخطئ في الجهل. I absolutely love this quote, and I needed to share it. I wanted you to see where I got this. So that was Adabuddin wa Dunya. Adabuddin wa Dunya, is that for al-Qardawi? Hold on. Did he actually write that? Hold on. So I'm going to go back all the way. Just at Adabuddin wa Dunya. I wonder who the author is. I'd love the quote. Hold on. Maybe I can actually get it translated for you right there. Let's see if I've got a good translation. Okay. He said, oh, here we go. He said, different wastefulness, know that extravagance in meanings. Extravagance is ignorance of the extent of rights, and wastefulness is ignorance of the location of rights. Both are reprehensible, but the reprehensibility of wastefulness is greater because of the extravagant person errs in excess, while the wasteful person errs in ignorance. End quote. I don't know if the translation was good. Let's see. Al-israf is ignorance in the amount of how you basically distribute rights. So if, let's say, you're caring about your pet more than you care about your parent, then that's israf. That's the amount of rights. You care about your friends more than you care about your siblings, that's israf. This is maqadir al-huquq. Your brothers deserve, or your siblings, they deserve more focus than your friends. And that's basically maqadir al-huquq, the amount that you care. And mawaqa al-huquq. Mawaqa al-huquq, of course, there are certain things that, yes, you care about, perhaps maybe animal rights. It's like, okay, but then when it comes to what we have to give in rights, in what we have to consider in place of rights, and consider in place of distribution, then that's basically tabdhir. So sarf is understanding the amount of rights. Tabdhir is understanding who on that orbit and where on that orbit and what they belong. So just like when we're looking at when we're seeing today. All right. They cared so much about the animals that are probably in Gaza, and they didn't even care about the death tolls and in the genocide that was happening against the people of Gaza. That's israf. That's israf. That is confusing. What's even more important? Is it the people or the animals? Is it your friends or is it your siblings? Who is more important to you? Is it your friend or is it your father? Who's more important to you? Is it your siblings or your friends? Who's more important to you? You're buying, I don't know, beautiful jewelry, or probably your brother is probably struggling to pay his rent. You're right there, probably buying jewelry, and your brother is struggling to pay rent. Well, it's his fault. He should have gotten a better job. At the end of the day, is that your brother is struggling to get evicted. So that's basically israf. You're right there spending so much money on dining out when your own brother or your own sibling is probably struggling to maybe. Can israf or tabdhir be in halal? Yes, it can be in halal. Like what? Well, remember, the Prophet ﷺ, had, for that person that wanted to give all of his wealth for sadaqah, donation, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Athulthu wa thulthu kathir." When they made the will, said, no, 1/3 and more than that is too much. So in other words, when you, even if it is in good cause, you have to know how to make that. 1/3 to 1/3. I really wanted, maybe we could, there's israf muharram, there's israf makruh, there's israf mubah. I really wanted to explain this. I thought it was a very, very important one. So maybe we could do that next time. Thought it was going to be very beneficial. I know it's going to be at the expense of tafsir, but I thought it was really worth it. Because if we don't understand tafsir, then we don't really understand our deen right. Because it's all about making the right distribution. That's it. Next week, inshallah. Well, not next week. Tomorrow is going to be fiqh of marriage. All right. And then the day after is going to be off. Then the day after is going to be fiqh of marriage again. Then the day after is going to be the tafsir. So we'll be doing this one, inshallah. Just remember, it's a very good one. And then we'll do we'll do basically this page, and then we'll get back to our tafsir. Okay. And let's see the tafsir right there. Oh dear, I blacked out. Okay. For the tafsir. Okay, here we go. For the tafsir, let's see what we've got. So this ayah, وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. Oh dear. Okay, here we go. وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. We're pretty much done with, let's see. We're pretty much finished with وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا, but we're gonna cover just a couple things in regards to وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. Okay, and then we are done with that ayah. Then we're going to continue with, look at this one. Okay, so what did he say? خير الصدقة ما كان عن ظهر غنى. So look at this. If somebody is making sadaqah with all their money, and the Prophet ﷺ had prevented that one would take out all their money basically for all the poor people. So خير الصدقة ما كان عن ظهر غنى. So at the end, should we actually be good and donate all our money? Or is that even bad? So we're going to discuss this, inshallah. All right. And inshallah, once we finish with that, then we're going to go with this ayah. وَمِنَ الْأَنْعَامِ حَمُولَةً وَفَرْشًا كُلُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ إِنَّهُ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. So we're really getting close to finishing Surah Al-An'am. far along are we, right? Is the question. Let's see right there. Surah, right there. I don't know what you can see, but let me see what you can see. Okay, this is what you can see. Let's look at right there and see what we're talking about. So we're right here. What we're going to do the إنه لا يحب المسرفين, and we're right there. Let's see, ثمانية أزواج, about this page, and let me see, والذين هادوا. So we're going to be discussing some things a little bit more right there. And of course, we're not in a rush because this is all reward eligible. That's all that matters. And okay, so we got 3 pages really left, and then we're going to be going to Surah Al-A'raf, right? Okay, so we got, inshallah, we're going to continue, and excited, inshallah. Well, that should actually be considered 4 pages. Okay, so this is it, inshallah. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. Let's see. She said, no, the honor and wastefulness may differ in meaning. Honor is ignorance of the amounts of rights, while wastefulness is ignorance of the places of rights. Both are blameworthy, and the blame for wastefulness is greater because the extravagant. Okay, good job. Yes, I love how that you quoted this one. Good job. Good job. If there are any questions or if there are any comments, I'd really love to hear them. No, there's always a lot to say, right? So, oh, I love the translation.
This is just translation of the same like quotes you said. I just translated with different software.
Good job, good job, good job, good job. Love it, love it, love it, love it. And yeah, so wanted you to see that one. You know, let me give you that link right there for that. I thought it was a very, very good article. Needed to share it. So that was in aluka.net, and you could actually find it. This website is a really good website, basically has really good articles that you could actually translate really easily. I mean, you could just hit this, translate this page, and you can translate it in whatever language you want and basically get it, you know, and right now, especially with you know, with AI, you can really get a really good accurate translation to a certain extent. So yeah. So inshallah then, since no one has any questions, and plus today is Jumu'ah, gotta get some things in place. So I'll end it right there. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. Are there any questions before we sign off?
My question is not relating to today's lesson, but I just want to know, can we access your, like you said, you have done Surah Nur explanation, commentary on Surah Nur. So, are they available? Their recordings are available?
They will give them to me 6 months from now, inshallah.
Okay. Okay, right.
Yeah, inshallah. This is the agreement between me and Jannah Institute that I would have these recordings after 6 months from now.
Right.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.